What about the philosophical reasons for supporting or opposing this initiative? We asked Luke Mayville, spokesperson for Idahoans for Open Primaries, and House State Affairs Committee Chairman Brent Crane to join us to discuss their views. Thank you both so much for joining us. Luke, I wanted to start with you. What's your pitch for voters? Why should they be voting for Prop 1?
There was a time in Idaho where we had a lot more freedom in our elections. Just 12 years ago, and for 40 years before that, we had an open primary system, and that meant that every voter, even if you were an independent and you didn't belong to a party, you were free to vote in every election. Now we have closed primaries for these last 12 years, and that means that if you're one of the 270,000 independent voters in Idaho, you get blocked from participating in the most important elections in our state. The only way you can participate is if you join a political party that you don't necessarily believe in or belong to. Proposition 1, there's different parts of it, but really it's very simple. It restores the right of every Idaho voter to participate in all of our elections, and it gives all voters better choices when they go to the ballot box.
I did want to ask you about the disenfranchising 270 voters. There are nonpartisan elections that unaffiliated voters can participate in, bonds and levies and contested judicial elections. Is that an accurate way to present that to voters?
It is very accurate to say that the most important elections in our state are the closed primary elections. These are the elections that choose who governs us at the state level, who our governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general is, our entire state legislature, our delegation to the United States Congress, are all chosen right now in closed elections where independent voters are shut out. And these are elections, it's important to remember, they're very low turnout. So you can win these elections by winning the votes of only about 9% of all of Idaho's voters. That's wrong. We really should be electing leaders who represent the broader community, not just one small slice of the community. That's how we get accountability. Because when we elect people with just 9% of the voters, they're not going to be accountable to the broader community.
Representative Crane, you oppose Proposition 1. I wanted to ask you why.
Well, first of all, thanks for having us here. Luke, thank you for being here. We probably have a little different take on this particular issue. This was a result of House Bill 351 that was passed in the Idaho legislature with overwhelming Republican support. All the Republicans in the Senate voted for it, and all but 3 Republicans in the House of Representatives voted for it. This was brought by the Speaker and the Pro Tem. And the issue that they were trying to solve at that point was crossover voting. My own county chairman, Democratic county chairman, told me, she said, Brent, we do crossover. We organize crossover votes and we vote in the Republican primary. And I find that objectionable. I think the Democrats should put their best candidate forward, the Republicans should put their best candidate forward, and those two should meet in the general election. And so that was the intent behind it. With respect to the 270,000 unaffiliated voters that Luke mentioned, those folks do have an opportunity to participate. It's up to the parties, if they want to allow the unaffiliated voters to vote in their primary. And the Democrats have in the past allowed them to vote. The Republicans have said, similar to Costco, if you want to buy products here, you got to have a membership. And that's the way it is in the Republican Party. If you want to vote in the Republican primary and select your candidates to move forward in the November general election, then you're going to have to be a part of the Republican Party.
There have been multiple people who have said that one of the offshoots of a closed Republican primary is that crossover voting, specifically that problem that you are hoping to prevent by closing the party and opposing an open primary and ranked choice voting in the first place. If you have an open primary or a blanket primary where everybody can participate, wouldn't that eliminate the issue with people affiliating with the Republican Party if they don't necessarily believe in Republican values?
Absolutely. The Republicans could vote for the Democrat candidate if they want to. So games are going to get played. Imagine it this way. Boise State's going to play UNLV this weekend. Imagine if we let the fans of UNLV and Boise State select Boise State's starting running back. Ashton Jeanty will not be starting on Saturday if that happens. And I don't believe it's good for the parties. I don't believe it's good for the process. Luke mentioned an interesting statistic that only 9% of the people are participating. Well, I pulled up the Secretary of State's website, and actually, since we passed closed primaries, primary voter participation has increased. It's up to, it was 32% in 2018, 36% in 2020, 32% in 2022. Prior to the passage, it was down around 27, 25, 26%. So it's actually increased voter turnout in primary elections, and I think that that's a good thing.
Well, I'm glad you all brought up the question of crossover voting, because this is often a complaint against open primaries. One of the reasons so many Republicans have endorsed Proposition 1 and supported across the state is because the design of Proposition 1 actually solves the problem of crossover voting. Because in the nonpartisan primary that we're proposing, 2 or 3 Republicans can proceed to the general election. In fact, we think a typical outcome on a ballot will be that 2 or 3 Republicans will all make it into the top 4, and maybe 1 Democrat will make it into the top 4. So what a lot of Republicans are noticing is that means if you're a Republican voter, your favorite Republican is highly likely to make it to the general election. So Democrats can't meddle in that and prevent your favorite Republican from making it through. So there's a lot of confusion out there because people compare Proposition 1 to the exact old system that used to exist. But there's this important difference, which is that it's a nonpartisan primary, so there won't be any crossover voting in the system we're proposing. Instead, it will be a system where every voter is free to vote in every election.
Luke, don't you, though, find a little bit of a problem if it's nonpartisan like that? Democrats right now are having a difficult time even fielding candidates for legislative races, let's say, for example. So in that case, if there's no Democrat running, there's 4 or 5 Republicans running, the Democrats then are selecting their candidate that they want to move forward, their Republican candidate. They're not going to select the best candidate. They're going to select the poorest candidate, in my opinion. And I think that that's one of the problems that you have with the way you're doing this. It's kind of a 2-tier system you've set up. You know, you've set up, hey, this open primary or unaffiliated primary, however you want to call it, and then the general is a whole different process with ranked choice voting. But don't you see that a concern for parties, or maybe even in a Sun Valley area, it's Republicans can't find somebody to run. It's just Democrats, and so Republicans are selecting. Do you not see that as an issue?
We don't see that as an issue. In most cases, we predict, and this is based on when they've done this in other states, in most cases there will be variety of candidates getting on the ballot. In Idaho, we lean Republican, so it typically would be 2 or 3 Republicans and at least 1 Democrat. And again, there's no way that Democrats can seriously influence which Republicans move forward, because if you really want your favorite Republican candidate to move forward as a Republican voter, that candidate just has to come in the top 4, which is not a heavy lift to get into that top 4. So it's no longer a case where only 1 Republican makes it through the primary. There'll now be 2 or 3. So it eliminates, generally, people who are really concerned about crossover voting, when they look closely at the design of Proposition 1, they say, wow, this actually solves that problem. This is a good system. So,
I did have a question for you. Based on the way that you phrased that question, you're looking at it, it seems, from a Republican point of view. That, I think that the more voters who weigh in on who moves forward to the general election with the ranked choice voting, the more likely it is that we're not going to have a conservative Republican who, if the Democrats weigh in, if independents weigh in. Is there something to be said, though, for more of your constituents in your district weighing in on who goes forward to that general election?
Well, Melissa, what I'm trying to figure out is what the problem is they're trying to solve. So I've sat on the State Affairs Committee for 18 years. All these type of issues come through State Affairs because they're election issues. But no one has ever brought a bill to deal with this issue. And so I'm trying to figure out what issues you're trying to solve. Is it the 270,000 disenfranchised voters? Is that your concern? Or is it parties are electing people on the fringes? What are you trying to solve with this particular issue, and why have you not brought it to the legislature to resolve it?
Well, it's very clear. It's 270,000 independent voters getting shut out of Idaho's most important elections. And then really the flip side of that same coin is that when you shut out that many voters from participating, you end up electing candidates who don't represent the broader community and therefore are not accountable to all the voters. We don't want elected officials getting through by only showing that they're really supported by about 9% of voters. We want elected officials ideally who are supported by over 50% of voters, because that's how we get accountability. That's how we get leaders who focus on the problems that the public really cares about. And I think that's something we can all agree on. We want accountability in our leadership. We want leaders who really feel the need to respond to the interests, the needs, the desires of the population as a whole, not just a tiny group of people who participate in a closed primary.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the closed primary. I did want to ask about the general election portion of this, the ranked choice voting. The Vote Yes on Prop 1 campaign has spent a lot of its energy sending that message about the importance of an open primary. In your opinion, why isn't the campaign focusing more on the ranked choice voting portion of it?
Well, this gets to Representative Crane's last question, what that core problem is we're setting out to solve. It really is the problem of the closed primary that we're setting out to solve. So open primaries is the core component of this. And we strongly believe that the best way to open the primary, the best way any state has done it, is this system based on what they've done in Alaska, where they create a top 4 open primary. Now, but if you want to do a top 4 open primary, you need something like ranked choice voting, because you need a way to prevent the vote getting split 4 ways. Because if you let's say you just took out the ranked choice voting part and only had a top 4 primary, you could end up with 4 candidates on the general election ballot, splitting the vote 4 ways so that the winner could only have 26% of the vote. And that would go against our entire goal. Because
you could have 3 Republicans who split the vote at 25% and have somebody eke out, like a Democrat eke out.
That's right. And that's why some Republicans are very much in support of ranked choice voting, because it's a way to make sure that the Republicans don't split the vote and hand the election to a Democrat or a third party or something. So the ranked choice voting part is a necessary way to avoid splitting the vote and to make sure that the candidate who wins has that broad support from the public, which is really what this is all about. Again, at the core of it is getting away from this closed system where we're electing candidates with a tiny number of the total voters, and moving to a system where our elected officials are elected with a much larger group of voters and where they're therefore accountable to the broader public.
Did you want to respond?
Well, I think what concerns me, Luke, first of all, you didn't bring it to the legislature. These are complex issues, and it should be, in my opinion, this should be something that should be dealt with at the legislative process, not through the initiative process. Also, some of the stuff that you guys are saying, I think is misleading. You guys, $4 million is being spent. $3 million of that is coming from out of state. And you're saying that in the open primary ad, it says corporate interests close the primaries. That's not true. That's patently false. It was the Idaho legislature, Lawrence Denny, Speaker of the House, Pro Tem Brent Hill, that brought that bill forward. There was no corporate interest. In fact, Senate Bill 1198 came, and I'm the one that stopped it. Because what Senate Bill 1198 said was the chairman of the party will determine if the primary is open or closed. And I said, no, Mr. Speaker, that's entirely too much power in the hands of one individual. Let's expand that out to the party. So I would ask that you take those ads down, or at least put ads on there that are honest, because it was not corporate money. And I would like to see this done with an Idaho solution, not a solution that's happening all across the country funded by people from back east. So that's very concerning to me.
Well, we have a different understanding of the history. It's very clear to us that it is special interests, corporate interests, party elites, party insiders who are the biggest beneficiaries of the closed primary system and who have supported the closed primary system. Because if you are a really well-funded interest group in Idaho, it's much better if elected officials are chosen in a low turnout closed primary election, because generally it's a lot easier to influence a tiny number of voters than to try to gain influence over the broader public. And what we've seen ever since we launched this campaign is that, there are special interest groups across Idaho who are vigorously opposed to this initiative because they like the system as it is. They like the closed primary where independent voters don't have a voice. So we think the story we're telling is accurate. And to the question of why we didn't just bring these reforms to the legislature, I just have to tell you, in all of my experience, watching politics since I grew up, since I was growing up in North Idaho, and since I've been involved the last 6-7 years, you can't get big reforms through the legislature. The legislature typically doesn't want to upset the status quo. Whether it was Medicaid expansion or protecting the ballot initiative process, the legislature has tended to want to really keep things the way they are, to really restrict participation to some extent, unfortunately. So we saw no desire in the legislature to do any kind of open primary reform.
Okay. I would disagree with you slightly on the history. Your history is not accurate. I was there. It was truly a fight internally inside the Republican Party. At that point, Kirk Sullivan was the chairman of the Republican Party, a more moderate member of the Republican Party, more of a traditional Republican. And it was the conservative Republicans at that point that said, look, we want to close the primaries. It was not corporate interests at all. The corporations would side with Kirk Sullivan. They were not siding with the conservatives. And so it was conservatives that led the charge to say Democrats should elect theirs, Republicans should elect their candidates in the primary, and then move forward. So just a little history lesson from a guy that's got some gray hair and been around and was there for the fight. It was not corporate interest at all. So I think you need to be accurate with the people about that. And also I think you need to be accurate that this is out-of-state money that's driving this. It's not in-state money. $3 million of out-of-state money buys a lot of media in Idaho.
Let me speak to that. The truth is that ever since we started this campaign a year and a half ago, Idahoans from every region of the state, all across the political spectrum, have joined in. Over 2,000 volunteers worked to put this initiative on the ballot, and we've now raised donations from over 5,000 Idahoans representing all 44 counties. So this is probably the largest grassroots base of donors that we've ever seen in the history of Idaho. It's true that there's supporters from other states, that there's some large donors too, but it cannot be denied that this is a homegrown Idaho campaign, that it's in response to an Idaho problem, and that this is supported by Idahoans all across the state.
Well, you and I probably have to agree to disagree, because I looked at the Secretary of State's website last night, and $3 million was from out of state, $1 million from in-state. And so it is out-of-state dollars that are driving that. As the chairman of this committee, I've not had anybody bring legislation forward to me saying, this is a problem, people are disenfranchised, let's solve it.
Can you say in good faith that you would have taken up an open primaries bill and actually that it would have had a chance of passing in the Idaho legislature?
Would I be willing to give an open primaries, is the question, would I be willing to give an open primaries bill a hearing in House State Affairs? If that's the question, the answer is 100% yes.
Would it have even a sliver of a chance in passing through your committee?
I don't know. I honestly don't. The makeup has changed since 2011. I think that Representative Palmer is the only individual that was there in 2011 as well that still serves on the committee. So it's a different makeup of the committee. You have no idea. You come, though, and make your best case. And what I would prefer to see is Idahoans coming to their legislature and saying, we have a problem, let's try to solve it, rather than out-of-state money.
But the initiative process does exist, and because of reforms to the initiative process that the legislature passed after students come first, it does by default have a wide geographical support in Idaho. And as Luke said, even if two-thirds of the money is coming from out of state, you still do have 44 counties represented in those campaign finance.
That's absolutely correct. However, let's take Medicaid expansion, one of the ones that Luke was able to successfully pass. I think we were told is around $400 million cost to the state to put that program in place if you look at the advertising. I talked to the chairman of the JFAC committee, Representative Horman, this morning. It's almost $1 billion. So what was told to the voters of Idaho and what actually happened when it was put in place, it's more than double the amount of money. We're being told that this will be $300,000 to $600,000 to implement. Secretary of State saying $25 to $40 million. So because these issues are complex, a lot of times it's good to have individuals that have expertise on them to sit down and look at it. If there's something that there needs to be solved, then we need to address it. But I'm telling you, in 18 years, no one's brought this bill forward. I've only been chairman for 4 years, but no one said, hey, independents are unhappy. If they are, I would point to you, why is the primary participation numbers increasing? If it's all about voter turnout, we're accomplishing voter turnout. There is more voters voting primary election-wise percentage today than there's ever been.
So you pointed to numbers being in the low 30%, and you said that that's high turnout. And everyone needs to understand that 30-something percent is only the Republican voters. Yep. So then when you back out, and well, in terms of participating in the closed Republican primary, what that turns out to be in the low 20s of the total voters in the state participating in the closed primary. So then if it's in the low 20s, to get a majority in that election, you only have to win about 12% of the vote. That's not a good outcome for the state of Idaho. If we actually want elected officials who are going to respond to the problems that the public faces, we want to hear from more voters than 12% who hand the winner a victory.
It's not that though, Luke. I mean, I've got the Secretary of State's website right here. It's total number of registered voters. Here's how many, and percent of registered voters that voted, 32.6%.
That's across all of the primaries though.
Yes.
So, but once you narrow it to the closed Republican primary where the actual winners are chosen, which we all understand that's the case, right? Typically in Idaho, whoever wins the closed Republican primary wins the election. So we're talking about a very small sliver of the population participating in the most decisive election that actually chooses who has power.
Would you rather a nominating process then, like a caucus, that they go to a caucus system and each party put their nominees forward? I can't solve the problem if the nominees from the Democratic Party are not strong or not good, or they're not putting up someone. That's not a fault and a result of the process. That's a party issue.
Well, one solution is to move to a nonpartisan top 4 primary, which is exactly what Proposition 1 proposes. And it's not about favoring one party or another, it's about trying to get officials who are accountable to all of the voters and not just one small group.
Bringing this full circle, if it does pass, will you work to repeal it in the legislature?
100%.
You
got to remember, Citizens Initiative passed a number of years ago term limits on legislators. You know who led the charge to repeal that? Bruce Newcomb.
The Speaker of the House.
The Speaker of the House, who is now one of the leaders of trying to get this initiative. And Bruce was right. I've been there 18 years. Do you know how many people are still serving 18 years later that started with me? One, Mike Moyle. The turnover, he was right. The turnover happens naturally.
But that's a different issue.
It is a different issue. But I'm saying there's not a problem. Voter participation is increasing under the closed primary system. You may not like who the voters are sending to the Capitol. That's a totally different discussion. But I don't think that this is going to solve the problem. It's going to make it worse. Again, I don't think the fans of UNLV should be selecting who Boise State's running back should be. And that's what this system will give us.
I'll just speak to the question of repeal. There's a comparison to term limits. It did take several years before the legislature repealed the term limits initiative. So it's a little shocking to me, to be honest, to hear so many legislators across the state saying, I don't care how the voters decide on this issue. I'm just going to turn around and repeal it the next day. Will of the people be damned. That's not how we're supposed to do things in Idaho. We have a citizen initiative process that our Supreme Court just 3 years ago called a fundamental right of the people of Idaho. They put it on the same level as the Second Amendment. It's a fundamental right of our citizens. So for legislators to just say, we don't care, the majority of the people who we're supposed to serve can stand up and say, we want to do things differently, but the legislators are just going to ignore that will of the voters. That's not how the system's supposed to work. That's not having a basic level of respect for the tax-paying citizens of Idaho.
Citizens are being lied to, Luke. What you guys are putting, the information, the numbers you're putting out there, you did it on Medicaid expansion and you're doing it again. It's not accurate information. We had historical horse racing that passed in the state of Idaho. I don't know if you recall that. We were lied to as members of the legislature, and you know what we did? We went and repealed the law because they lied to us. Honesty is important. Integrity is important. And this campaign is being funded by out-of-state interests that want to fundamentally change Idaho's election process. And Idaho has a good election process. It is working. Participation is up. But you're funded by out-of-state money. And they're trying to change the way we do things because they don't like the outcomes of the legislature. And so legislators are saying, because people are being lied to, they're not being told the truth. They're not being told the full story. You're doing two things in this initiative, not one. It's all been about open primaries. You're changing the primaries because if you don't get the result you want in the primary, our backstop is ranked choice voting in the general election. I think it's going to be unconstitutional. I think the Supreme Court would say, that's two different subjects. We can't pass two subjects.
If it's unconstitutional, you as a legislator ought to leave it up to the Idaho Supreme Court to figure that out. You shouldn't turn around and repeal it. You should leave it to the court to figure out if it's unconstitutional. Medicaid expansion was funded by 90% federal funds, and recent polling has shown that 67% of the people of Idaho still approve of it. But this debate isn't about Medicaid expansion. Sure. We're talking about Proposition 1. The idea that we're lying to the public is just false. The court, this has just now been litigated in a district court in Idaho because the Attorney General claimed that our volunteers went out there and deceived voters. The court looked really closely at all the evidence provided by the Attorney General that we were somehow being deceptive. The court concluded that actually all that evidence shows that the campaign told the truth. And the district court rejected Attorney General Labrador's claims and said, actually, this campaign was truthful. So to be told, to have to sit here and be told that I've been lying to the people of Idaho, that over 2,000 volunteers have gone around and lied to the people of Idaho, it's insulting and it's not true.
Okay, so
we have been going out, just in the past couple weeks, I've been at about 20 town halls all across this state, talking with voters who agree or disagree all across the political spectrum, talking about every detail of this initiative. We're having a lively, robust conversation with the people of Idaho. So if the people of Idaho decide on November 5th to vote yes on Proposition 1, that should be respected. That should be respected by you and by the entire legislature.
But if I'm told I'm buying a thoroughbred and I get a donkey, but I've been told it's a thoroughbred, I'm being lied to. You're saying 270,000 voters can't vote. That's not true. They can affiliate with a party and vote if they want to. It's their choice. Second of all, in your ad, you guys are saying that corporate interests close the primaries. That is patently, blatantly false. You're saying that that voter participation is down. It's up. I got the Secretary of State's website to prove it. So you're not being candid and honest with these people, and that's what frustrates me. And then it's out-of-state money that's driving it. The bulk of your money is out-of-state. It's not in-state.
The core proposition of this campaign is that Proposition 1 would restore the right of 270,000 independent voters to participate in primary elections. They are currently shut out of those elections because the only way they can exercise their right to vote is if they give up their independent status and join a political party. That cannot be denied.
No, they can vote in the Democrat primary.
It cannot be denied, no, because we're talking about the decisive, closed primary that chooses, you have to admit, whoever wins that closed primary usually wins the election. So that's how we're choosing our leaders in Idaho.
Page 6 of the law, House Bill 351, that's the law, says the parties determine what they're going to do with the unaffiliated voters. The Democrats have said, come on, you can vote with us if you want to. So those folks can vote in that primary if they want to. They are choosing not to. The Republicans on the other side are saying, no, you've got to be a member of the Republican Party to vote. So it's a misleading statement at best.
We are going to have to leave it here, but I will give you, if you could sum up your argument in 2 sentences, what would it be?
We have closed primary elections in Idaho. That's a serious problem because 270,000 independent voters are being shut out. Proposition 1 will restore the right of every voter to vote in every taxpayer-funded election.
2 sentences.
Sure. Well, I would say it this way. If you guys think that Boise State's going to play UNLV this weekend, if you think that UNLV fans should be selecting Boise State's starting running back, then vote yes on Prop 1. If you think just Boise State fans should select who the starting running back is going to be for that game, vote no on Prop 1. Because Ashton Jeanty, under an open primary system, will never make it and be the starting running back. He wouldn't even be on the roster. If you keep it closed primaries, you're going to have Ashton Jeanty running the ball, scoring touchdowns, and winning a Heisman.
And as a reminder, voters can read the entire proposal on their ballot and look up more information in their voter guide sent out by the Secretary of State. Luke Mayville, spokesperson for Idahoans for Open Primaries, Representative Brent Crane, Chairman for the House State Affairs Committee. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.